So in the first episode of this show, I referred to a possible mystery tunnel that would have predated the Mersey Tunnel, spanning the River Mersey. This came from a book by James Stonehouse, Recollections of Old Liverpool, I think it was.
Yeah, it has one or two different titles. Recollections of a Nonagenarian is the original one, and then I think it's Recollections of Old Liverpool when he actually gave his name, James Stonehouse.
Well, what do you think about that? Because one of the things I was very, very sceptical. I thought, well, surely something that old couldn't really have lasted. And then down in Tintern, again, road workers, water workers found a tunnel that predates or was around the same age as Tintern Abbey. So I thought, well, maybe there is something to it. Do you think there's anything to the idea that an ancient tunnel once went under the Mersey?
Well, that is something that comes from James Stonehouse as well. Now, James Stonehouse is an interesting character. He told a lot of very interesting stories. He's the origin of the stories about the Williamson tunnels. He seems to have exaggerated about some things. Possibly he wasn't in his 90s when he wrote the book, as he claimed. Possibly the tunnels he described weren't quite as big as he said. There's evidence for that. What he says in his book is when St Mary's was being built, the church right by the priory, they found a tunnel which seemed to go under the Mersey. Now, maybe it did. It would be quite an engineering feat. I mean, the Mersey tunnels as such, being built in the more recent times, they were quite an engineering feat in themselves. I think possibly what they found was a tunnel leading from the priory to a spot outside the priory, and it was another medieval escape tunnel because the priory itself was in the middle of the forest of Wirral. And this is one, obviously, this is a connection with monks, but most of the tunnel stories, they consist of either a church or a manor house, a hall, and the tunnel goes from there to another building somewhere else in the same village or township. So I would guess that tunnel, and there are other stories of tunnels to do with the priory, that tunnel was one that went from somewhere inside the priory to somewhere outside the priory. So if the place was attacked by any bandits or freebooters, the monks could have escaped.
So you've mentioned a couple of times about buildings being attacked in Wirral. Another building that I noticed is sort of semi-fortified is Brimstage Hall. I pass it to come here, and I don't suppose you know anything about that, but what is that fortified for a particular reason? Do you know?
Well, it's interesting. It's one of these things where serious historians tend to try and downplay things. What they say about fortifications like the one at Brimstage is it was basically it was a way of keeping up with the Joneses. It was a way of bragging that we've got the money to build our own little tower, and that really nothing very much went on. There was a thing called a license to crenellate, which you paid for if you had a hall or whatever, and you could turn it into a fortified manor house, basically. And there's an idea that this was just bragging rights, late Middle Ages. But from what I've read about what actually went on in Wirral in particular, you would need that kind of thing. Now, Irby Hall has the remains of a moat round it. Houghton Hall, which didn't last after the World War I for various reasons, that was originally they had a license to crenellate. That belonged to the Stanleys, who I mentioned before, the foresters. They were given a license to crenellate sometime in the 1400s, I think. So they had a fortified manor house. And there's evidence of other places round Wirral, other halls and manor houses, having being basically fortified. Oh, Thurston Hall, for another example, that seems to have had a moat round it. There are even stories that there might have been a castle there. Very confusing stories, hard to... They try and locate it. It's hard to work out where they're talking about. But certainly it seems that all the halls, the old halls in Wirral, had at least a moat round them, and quite possibly had more fortifications. And there is the this legal case of the Thurston Hall being attacked. There's another story, well, another legal case coming from the medieval equivalent of Hansard about a younger son of the Poole family, the family who came from Poole in what's now Ellesmere Port. He was looking for a way to make his, well, basically a way to get rich, and he abducted the widow of the lord of the manor of somewhere outside Warrington, I forget exactly where, and carried her off into the forest of Wirral and imprisoned her in Birkenhead Priory. So certainly there were any number of outlaws and ne'er-do-wells in the area. Later on, forcibly married her at Bidston Church, but she was actually rescued. Real medieval damsel in distress was actually rescued by a knight in shining armour, who was again one of the Stanleys, but obviously one of the more decent sort.